I'm Shepard. I'm a Christian who's doing a deep dive in the book of Romans, and I want you to come along with me. So let's do a really quick recap. Romans was written by Paul to the church at Rome, and so far he's just been dropping a whole bunch of knowledge on them about Jesus and what it means to live for him. And in the last verses, before we get to today, he talked about the Jews and how they are the chosen people, that God set them apart to be his, and how he gave them the law to know how to live. Yet quite often they reject his law, and many Gentiles have lived out that law, even though they did not actually have the law to look at. This brings us to today, and before we can get into that, we need to do a little bit of a backstory, because Paul is now looking at circumcision and how it should be viewed. So in Genesis 17, 9-4, God sets Abraham and his whole line apart, and one of the ways he does that is through circumcision. In verse 10 he says, "This is my covenant which ye shall keep between me and you and your offspring after you. Every male you shall circumcise. You shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you." So God uses circumcision to differentiate between his people and all the other people in the surrounding areas. And they still do this today as they did in Paul's time and view it as their status as God's people. But with Jesus, everything changed, and God was open to all people. And Paul then felt the need to address his fellow Jews about this. So that brings us to the end of chapter 2, where we were looking at verses 25 to 29. For in 25, Paul starts, "For circumcision indeed is of value, if you obey the law. But if you break the law, your circumcision becomes uncircumcision." So Paul really wants to be clear. Circumcision has value when it is tied to the law and the law is obeyed. Otherwise, it has no value, and as he puts it, becomes uncircumcision. He continues on in verse 26, "So if a man who is uncircumcised keeps the precepts of the law, will not his uncircumcision be regarded as circumcision?" He makes a good point. It's all about keeping the law. He goes on in verse 27, "Then he who is physically uncircumcised but keeps the law will condemn you who have the written code and circumcision, but break the law." So the problem was, many Jews viewed their circumcision as the thing that saves them, the thing that made them gods. But it is tied to obedience, and then if you don't obey, those who do obey without having that special connection are then in the right. Paul brings this thought to the end in verses 28 and 29, where he says, "For no one is a Jew who is merely one outwardly, nor is circumcision outward and physical, but a Jew is one inwardly, and circumcision is a matter of the heart, by the Spirit, not by the letter. His praise is not from man, but from God." So Paul finishes that chapter with a clear call to live for God, not in some tradition-based legalistic way, but to live in a Jesus-filled heart way. He wants everyone to understand it is not what happens to your body, it's what happens to your heart. And Jesus came, lived a perfect life, and died taking our sin, so that we can be part of his family, and the Holy Spirit can live in our hearts. It's not about rule following and perfection, it's about love and forgiveness. And that will be seen in our actions, not by the amount of skin anyone has or has not in the game. So that's it, the end of chapter 2. Sorry it took so long to get this, computer problems. You have a good day and hope to see you in chapter 3. God bless.